Composer Gloves here, and this is the 37th video in the Kontakt from the Ground Up tutorial series, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this sound. Just kidding, we're going to talk about the distortion module. You knew that already though. This is, surprisingly, a flute. Now, I have a tutorial series because this is called distortion, okay? And there's all these different kinds of distortion. Thing about distortion, though, is it's a blanket term, and it can mean 100 million different things. And if I made in the FL12 effects series, one on the wave shaper, because I was asked about saturation, which is just another term for distortion, and there's just 100 different ways to do this. And there's different types of distortion. Distortion is basically when you are manipulating the waveform, you're manipulating the data, the voltage, whatever it is, to react differently. So distortion can be your friend, it cannot be your friend, and go watch the wave shaper one if you want to know more about distortion, but we're going to talk about what this does specifically. So there are a few different ways to make distortion, but what they have here is labeled tube and transistor, and they actually specify for us that tube emphasizes it's emulating tube distortion, which I guess I highly suspect that tube also affects odd harmonics as well, but it says that it only here though it says that it only affects even harmonics, which creates a particular kind of tone. It's more similar to a square wave, but if we play our notes versus the transistor, which does odd harmonics. So that's the difference between these two. However, you got to remember, analog gear, heated up and cooled down. I wouldn't be surprised if they've written algorithms to emphasize certain odd harmonics differently, but even odd are emphasized principally. It does not say that though, it's just a theory. So if you do not know what I'm talking about when I'm saying harmonics or partials, which is another term for it with a little bit of a different view, go watch my DSP series. It will explain that. So anyways, you can see you can turn it up pretty easy, and you have your drive, which affects the amount, essentially sort of like a wet dry. You'll notice that our gain immediately goes up, and we talked about those outrageously fast delay signals. I suspect a delay signal to be able to achieve something like this, because it has to go through processing to get back to it. Otherwise, we'd have magic distortion from nowhere. So I suspect there's some sort of delay for, well, there has to be for almost any digital effect. And that reminds me of glitch mob. I don't know if any of you guys out there like glitch mob. You have dampening, which does the same thing as delay. It attenuates the higher frequencies, lowers the volume of the higher frequencies, because occasionally it doesn't sound so nice. If we make our, let me change this wave candy view to be a oscilloscope, and let me zoom in on it. You'll see that we have a lot more. If I had lower notes, I'd hit them because the waveforms would be bigger. But we see we have a lot of kind of wiggle. So you have a few different kinds of distortion. You have what's called crossover distortion, which is you take the input that does not vary very much from the zero crossing point. So input that only comes right here, and you distort that. And distorting essentially is you're taking the slope. So a slope, if you have gone through algebra, you know, slope of 1 over 2 or 2 over 1, and it oscillates back and forth using this slope. But it's not a line. This is different. But anyways, you take it and you adjust the slope to be much steeper. In the digital world, you could theoretically go straight up and down. But in the analog world, that would be impossible because you approach a limit, which would be, if you study calculus, that's where that comes from. But you see we have a lot more waves going in here because we're using a complex waveform. So we have a lot more stuff going on. If we turn our dampening on, though, it'll take a lot of the upper frequency out, which also happens to remove a lot of the sort of chaos because upper frequencies tend to bunch together. Now this isn't the slowest waveform either, but you'd see a lot more action going on the upper ends of things for this. This is where, if you've watched one of my other series like Massive from the Ground Up or FM8 from the Ground Up, you've probably seen sine waves behave enough to be able to tell what I'm talking about. But again, transistor emphasizes odd harmonics, tube even. The dampening is just a high pass filter essentially. We have an output, which could be useful. You may need to reduce the volume actually. because a lot of times it becomes outrageously loud and you want that tone, but you don't want it that loud. So you might use that. You might get creative and use a compressor, do weird things with that. Maybe even a transient master and see what happens there. I don't know. So that is all that is. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe. If you ate a banana today, you should really consider subscribing. I think it was destiny. And have a blessed day.